Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 15th of November, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information no matter what part of Alaska you're watching from tonight. Thanks for joining us, and as always, you can call 1-800-472-0391. That's the Alaska Weather Information Line. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska or on social media, NWS Alaska on Facebook, NWS Juneau, NWS Fairbanks, and NWS Anchorage on Twitter. And of course, if you can't find what you're looking for on any of those services, email me, david.snider@noaa.gov, and I will reply to you personally and try and help you out any way I can. I want to show you something a little different tonight. Take a look at this. This is our old satellite picture. This is a geostationary satellite picture of south central Alaska. This satellite is sitting a little bit over the west coast, a little bit further east than that probably, and it is looking down at the same spot on planet Earth the whole time, taking a picture of just about the whole visible plane of the world. And we zoom in on South Central to show you this, and it does a pretty good job. This is fairly nice. You can see a lot of things here. You can see the snow on the mountains. You can see some of the fog over the Kenai Peninsula today. You can see the shadow of Denali if you're heading up the Parks Highway here. There's Talkeetna and Anchorage, Prince William Sound, Whittier, all the way out toward Yakutat, and you can see some low clouds here and some fog and low clouds around Glen Allen, all the way out toward Tok as well. This is low resolution though compared to what we just saw today. Let me just step out of the way for you so you can see this whole picture in its full glory. This is our new satellite picture, and perhaps it's hard to tell from where you're watching tonight, but I hope you can see some of the detail. This is the new GOES-S satellite that is being moved into position in the right spot right now. This is preliminary and not operational just yet, but we are checking it out, testing it out, and oohing and eyeing over all the things that we can see even better now. The resolution is so much better. You can see some of the smaller clouds forming in the Susitna Valley. Look at the shadow and the detail there that you can see in the shadow being thrown northward from Denali. We have a much better view of some of the fog and the low clouds around the Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound, and look at how much better we can see the fog just over the Kenai Peninsula itself and into the Turnagain Arm. As you look out across the northern Gulf, a lot of clear sky here and a much better detailed view of the snow and the valleys and the mountaintops all over South Central. And this is just one of the first glimpses that we're seeing around South Central. For weeks, we will be watching this very carefully, making sure everything works just right. And eventually we'll put this into operational use, and it will be a lot easier for you to use this as well from our website and from some of the links that we're sharing. We're sharing a lot of this information on the NWS Anchorage Twitter account. Watch for a post later this evening as well, showing you this comparison again on social media. I hope that you'll check it out. And when you hear about a new weather satellite or science satellite being put into orbit over the United States or over the Northern Hemisphere, this is why it's important. So again, check that out if you can. It's pretty cool stuff and science in use today, and we are just really, really excited about it. Eventually, it will help to feed this type of image that you look at every night with me here on Alaska Weather. Thursday's view of the satellite picture over the last 12 hours shows clouds working into the northern Gulf. This warm and wet air is piling into southwestern Alaska, and because there's such a huge area of cold, high pressure centered up over the Yukon, I think it was about 1,036 millibars or so. It's leaving a lot of that cold air just wedged out across the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta. So as you know, when warm and wet air comes in on top of that, sometimes that changeover initially can be a little rough. You'll probably see a little bit of snow, but then precipitation, especially along the coast where it's a little bit warmer and can't stay cold, may switch over to a rain and snow and maybe even a freezing rain kind of mix there. So we're going to watch for that to happen. This is a pretty good setup where that is possible. Across southeast, generally dry conditions today, but we've seen a little bit of fog across southern parts of southeast. If we had that GOES-M satellite in operational mode right now, I bet we could have a really good glimpse of that to show you. We'll keep our eyes open. Out across the west, you can see that next wave coming in across the western chain. Again, this one's probably not going to make it quite to storm for us as it stretches out, and you can already see that happening here, kind of stretching out. A lot of that storm energy that's wrapped up into it will kind of get sheared and stretched apart. If it was concentrated and stayed all together, it could be a stronger storm, but right now this is all kind of being stretched out here across the west. So we're going to get more clouds across south central and southwestern Alaska as we go through the next 24 hours there, and the weather will gradually change from south to north. In the meantime, pretty dry conditions across most of the region. We did see a few areas of light snow around Northway, really not much to write home about there. A little bit of fog again across southern and southeast. Here's the next weather maker in the western Gulf, 984 millibars there. A trough of low pressure lies across the heart of the Bering Sea. And pretty much dry conditions so far in southwestern Alaska. Remember, the high is rough, tough, and hard to bluff. It just does not want to give it up and get out of the way. So this is going to have to do the trick and work its way and force its way into southwestern Alaska. Eventually, we'll see the low out in the west get a little bit closer. That'll start to take shape tonight as that front moves across the central chain. Watch for periods of rain and snow generally north of the chain. Rain spreading in. Winds will pick up a little bit more. The low's down to about 979 millibars, still well south of Attu and Kiska. In the western Gulf, our low here drops to about 995 millibars, and we're still looking at generally foggy conditions. My understanding is around the Juneau area today, especially, it was kind of drizzly and damp. The roads never really dried off, and temperatures are dropping fairly quickly tonight. As that happens, you're probably going to see some fog, but you may also see temperatures be cold enough for that to freeze. So if you're driving around town, no matter what part of southeast you're in, especially in Juneau, be extra careful there on the roads tonight. High pressure sitting around Yukon at 1,040 millibars. We'll watch for fog around the Copper River Valley once again, and just north of that, as you get up into some of the passes, it might be breezy enough for a little bit of blowing snow. For most of the Cook Inlet region, there may be a chance for some fog once again. Most of the precipitation is going to hold on the eastern side, around Whittier and then all the way down the Resurrection Bay and the Kenai Fjords. Into Kodiak Island, winds are picking up over the Barren Islands tonight, and periods of moderate to heavy rain may set up. This is all tapped into a pretty decent subtropical moisture plume. So in this region here tonight, we'll watch for some moderate to heavy rain, and this is eventually going to fill in across northern parts of the Gulf and spread eastward just a little bit more toward Yakutat and northern southeast. There's the snow across the west coast. Remember, we're talking about places like Bethel out toward Hooper Bay and Newtok, all the way down toward Cape Newenham. And along that outer coast again, we're expecting to see periods of freezing rain, or maybe just rain and snow mixing in. But initially, we may see that kind of mixing in a little bit right along the coast before it becomes a little bit better warmed up and turns over to more of a widespread rain area. The winds will pick up across the Koyukuk Valley, northward toward the Kobuk and Noatak as well. Look for fog across the Beaufort Seacoast down to the west and through the Bering Strait we go, and low pressures forming there at around 1,000 millibars. And that same problem we were just talking about here in southwest shifts a little bit further north into Norton Sound. Watch for some areas of freezing rain there. At this point, there's no watches, warnings, or advisories there, so we don't really think it's going to get that bad. But you might notice that, and if that's just enough to make you slip outside while you're moving around, just be careful out there if you start to see that setting up. Watch for areas of snow around Galena and the lower Koyukuk out toward the Yukon Valley and the Kuskokwim, and northward into the parks. You might start to see some snow generally on the western side, to west of where the highway is. As you look out west, you see our thunderstorm symbol. That means there is a chance for some convection. That upward building of clouds there could produce some thunder and lightning there. We've seen that several times with each one of these waves. As that spreads eastward, that'll mix up a little bit more. Notice that heavy rain channel there. That's shifted for the northern Gulf a little bit more to the northeast now, and that'll stretch from about Yakutat into northern parts of southeast for Saturday. It does look like that snow level is going to come up, though. So if you're looking at this from Haines and Skagway and Juneau saying, oh, that looks like it's a kind of a snow setup, it probably will start that way on Saturday. But the good news is it looks like that rain will start to fill in pretty quickly. As the warmer air builds in, that snow level should climb fairly quickly, and that's something I know you're all very used to. Around the Alaska Range and northward, there's a chance for some spotty precipitation. I kind of painted that in there a little heavy, I'll admit. But it does look like there will still be some of that residual warm air there that might make for a rain and snow mix and maybe very slight amounts of freezing rain. It doesn't look like that's going to be a huge issue around the Fairbanks region, but as you move southward a little bit towards some of the higher terrain in the Alaska Range, you might run into a little bit of that initially before it changes over to snow. Northward we go to Kotzebue Sound. It looks like snow will be passing through the region with that low pressure system just east of St. Lawrence Island. Behind that, it's all a northerly wind. The snow line will be moving southward as that colder air continues to push southward as we go through the rest of the weekend. So a lot going on, but it's all centered up around this broad area of low pressure that's really focused on the Alaska Peninsula and southwestern Alaska as we start up your weekend. Here's a look at temperatures by tomorrow morning. We look at southeast in the lower to mid 30s for most areas. Northward, Skagway, Haines, Juneau, you're probably talking about temps in the 20s. Prince William Sound also as cold as that, 31 degrees around Homer, 44 in Kodiak and mild there. 6 below around Fairbanks, 25 below in Arctic Village. A cold day there today, only made it to about 27 below. And anywhere from 5 to 10 below for the Beaufort Seacoast. Milder to Kotzebue Sound, temps in the single digits and teens. Southwest in the 20s and 30s, Bristol Bay, and many areas along the Alaska Peninsula closer to 40. Warming up to almost 50 degrees there tomorrow. For Bethel, look for a high of 34. About the same in Nome, 14 for Utqiagvik, 4 around Kaktovik, 11 below for Fort Yukon. Fairbanks 15 above, 30s for the Cook Inlet region and the Parks Highway System, 30 degrees around Talkeetna, and 30s and 40s for Southeast. By Saturday morning, temperatures are expected to be in the 30s and 40s around Southeast. Prince William Sound will be close to 40 degrees, maybe a little cooler in Whittier. Palmer, Wasilla, look for a low around 30, closer to 30 degrees around Seward as well, 46 in Kodiak. Southwestern temperatures in the 30s. Down to the Alaska Peninsula we go, 45 in Sandpoint, about 30 for Bethel, 30 in Nome, 18 for Kotzebue, 1 below in Utqiagvik, just a little bit milder in Wainwright. 10 degrees below zero for Arctic Village. Fairbanks looking at 10, South Central in the lower 30s. By the afternoon, we see temperatures that are easily in the 40s and warming up for most of Southeast. Look at Sitka, almost 50 degrees. South Central should see temperatures in the mid to upper 30s with Homer and Seward back in the 40s. Almost 50 degrees really in Kodiak, fairly mild for Sandpoint, Cold Bay and Falls Pass as well. 47 for Cordova, 21 in Fairbanks, 8 above for Utqiagvik, and warming up for the Kotzebue Sound region. Looks like Shishmaref could reach 29, 36 in Nome. Most of Southwest, including Nunivak Island, will make it into the 30s and 40s, 41 in St. Paul, and 36 for Sabunga.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And moving on to aviation weather now, IFR is expected across the North Slope with high pressure in command of most of the interior. We're going to see generally VFR conditions to start the morning. Don't be surprised to find some isolated areas of fog. That'll be true across some parts of South Central, but you'll notice that that trend is ending as high pressure shifting eastward a little bit more. We're going to get more influx of the moisture coming out of the Gulf. We're starting to see convection across southern parts of Southeast as we get into the morning hours. And IFR is going to spread across Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula and a little bit further north into the Bering Strait region, St. Lawrence Island, the Yukon Delta, Nunivak Island, and out toward the central chain with MVFR fairly widespread just about everywhere else out at sea. By the afternoon, IFR is pushing northward, still not over Southeast or the Copper River Valley, but you can see it working into the Resurrection Bay area, close to and in the western end of Prince William Sound, but not the entire area. Valdez and Cordova flirting with MVFR at this point. IFR conditions across the Alaska Peninsula, hit and miss inside the Bristol Bay region, and then again working northward through the Bering Strait. MVFR up north, and more convection added out across the western Aleutians as low pressure moves east and south. For Saturday morning, IFR is taking over the Gulf. MVFR for most of Southeast. You'll see IFR across Chilkoot and White Pass into Prince William Sound. Your north and western Alaska Range passes most of Kodiak Island and the chain. And again, many of the western capes and some areas inland in the west and into Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula, and the Bering Strait. The North Slope's looking pretty good, but that effect of high pressure is pulling away. So you'll see VFR in the interior, but fewer places will have VFR as we go through your Saturday. Notice the changes happening around the middle Tanana Valley and just points north into the upper Yukon Valley. Still looking at generally VFR conditions for Adigan and Anaktuvik Pass up to the Bering Strait. IFR is still holding there across many of the lowland areas in Southwest. IFR spreading across the Gulf, Prince William Sound, and a large part of Southeast now at this point. Saturday is looking at IFR with convection spreading east and south of Nikolsky, Dutch Harbor, and Unalaska. Past conditions look like this for now, and again through Saturday it looks like Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass are going to be VFR. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass are leaning over to IFR conditions for your Friday. Rainy Pass probably pushing over to MVFR. Windy Pass and Isabel Pass will likely hold at VFR conditions. Mentasta Pass VFR throughout the day. Tanita Pass looking pretty good tomorrow. Portage Pass though switches over to IFR on the east side there. It's going to be the worst. And Chilkoot and White Pass should be VFR. Freezing levels show warmer air is pushing quickly into the central and eastern Gulf. Levels around The northern end of southeast range around 2,000 feet with a surface freezing line just underneath that, and down toward the Dixon entrance, the line's around 6,000 feet there. Warmer air is also working into southwestern Alaska with levels as high as 4,000 feet, and another surge of warmth coming up toward the central and eastern Aleutians, levels just to the south there as high as 6,000 to 8,000 feet. Icing potential is still somewhat minimal, but it's going to be going up. The good news is, though, that freezing level is also going up in altitude. So levels right now around 4,000 to 5,000 feet over south central, with isolated moderate possible there with the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, and up the west coast, and then also across the central and western parts of the Aleutians above 5,000 feet. No major risk for southeast or the central or eastern interior. The jet stream has a pretty steady and solid southerly fetch there coming in across the open water, 65 knots there, still under the effects of ridging for the west coast and the eastern Gulf, including southeastern Alaska. The main river of fast-moving winds coming in around 135 knots across the North Pacific there, and we have the Arctic jet blowing in from the west and southwest at 95 knots right over the Brooks Range and the North Slope. At 9,000 feet, you can see that steady southerly flow coming in across the Gulf. Wind speeds there anywhere from 30 to 45 knots, 30 knots inland over the Kenai Peninsula in the west, the Koyukuk Valley, southerlies over the North Slope, and then bending off to the east in the northern Yukon around 10 to 20 knots. Southerlies also expected for southeastern Alaska, 30 to 35 knots there, and a steady southwesterly flow coming into the Bering Sea. As far as that trough of low pressure sits across the central Bering, that trend will continue, and you can see already a return flow over the Kamchatka Peninsula as well. 3,000 feet, a very fast river of air right here across the northern Gulf. In fact, it bends sharply to the west instantly as it runs into the coast. About 40 to 50 knots there right along the coastline itself. So you're going to find some really fast moving winds there. Could cause you some problems. Southerlies across southeast, light winds across the interior, only 5 to 10 thanks to the ridge of high pressure, and southerlies also across the west coast, 15 to 20. But watch out for some very fast moving winds here just west of the Alaska range. Those could be up to 50 knots. So we're watching for turbulence, of course, below 4,000 feet, considerable moderate all the way from Sitka, rounding to the northern Gulf Coast into southwest Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, the lower Kuskokwim Valley, and into the Yukon Delta, and chop below 4,000 feet in the west.
Where did the Big Dipper go?
Welcome to Stargazers. I'm James Albury, the director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dehne Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory. We're here to help you find your way around the sky. Hey James, what is the most recognizable star pattern in the sky?
That would, of course, be the smiling Dehne Regas asterism.
Well, obviously, put any number of stars together and you might imagine that. And we can't forget the James Albury Hercules constellation.
Well, duh.
But I think the easiest to identify is the Big Dipper.
Definitely. There's something about those 7 semi-bright stars that grab your attention.
And the Big Dipper is up almost all year round.
Emphasis on the almost.
Yes, and there is one season where the Big Dipper dips so low in the northern sky that it may become invisible.
And that season is now. We're going to head out to the stars and show you where not to look for the Big Dipper in the sky.
And when you can see it again. I know it may seem weird that we're doing a show on what not to look for in the night sky, but we don't want you to freak out when you step outside and not see the Big Dipper.
The Big Dipper is always somewhere in the northern sky. We call it circumpolar since it can be seen making a complete circle around Polaris, aka the North Star.
When you face north and watch the stars long enough, you'll notice that they move in a slow, counterclockwise circle around one point.
That pivot point is the North Star. Any constellations near the North Star make a tiny circle around it, like the constellations Ursa Minor, which includes the Little Dipper stars, Cassiopeia the Queen, and Ursa Major, which includes the stars from the Big Dipper.
But the Big Dipper can get low in the sky in its nightly journey around Polaris. So while most nights you can see the Big Dipper somewhere in the northern sky, for about 2 months it can skim across the horizon and be blocked by trees, buildings, or the ground itself.
And so, on November evenings, you'll have a hard time finding the Big Dipper. Man, that's a bummer.
Now, this annual disappearance of the Big Dipper is described in some Native American myths. Instead of a big spoon, they saw it as a big bear. Now, The normal picture of the bear shows a body with a really long stretched out tail.
But other Native American groups pictured it a little differently. The Iroquois tribes saw the 4 stars in the spoon as the bear and the 3 stars in the handle as 3 hunters.
The first hunter is carrying a bow and arrow, the second is carrying a pot, and the third is carrying sticks to make a fire.
Now look carefully at the second hunter. The bright star is called Mizar, but if you squint, you may be able to see a dimmer star above it. That is the star Alcor, and it can be seen with the naked eye too. Mizar can be the hunter, and Alcor is the pot on his shoulder. As the night moves on, it looks like the hunters are chasing the bear. Legend has it that when the bear is too low in the sky and becomes invisible, that the hunters finally caught him. And this happens on the evenings of October and November every year.
And what happens to the trees every October and November, at least in the northern United States? Well, the storytellers would point to the changing leaves as evidence of a cosmic battle.
Exactly. Now, this may be a little gross, but they would say that the first hunter had shot and killed the bear, and its blood fell from the sky and turned the leaves on the trees orange and brown and red.
And that's why you can't see the Big Dipper in the night sky this fall. But don't worry, it'll be back.
In fact, if you stay up past midnight, you can see it standing on its handle.
And every spring, the bear comes back to life, the hunters resume their chase, and the leaves return to the trees.
The circle of life in the stars. It's all there when you keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And moving on to your sea ice edge now, no big changes for the Beaufort Seacoast. You can see the ice edge along the Chukchi Sea is expanding just a little bit more. We're seeing more growth in the protected areas and the unprotected areas now, the upper parts of the Cosby Sound region and Norton Sound. So ice is expanding further and further south. You can see a little more marginal ice there in the mouth of the Kuskokwim. Nothing significant though in the Bering Sea or really in most of the Chukchi Sea out over the open water just yet, but temperatures in the sea surface are cooling down, so watch for more. You can always watch this with us at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. On to the marine forecast now for southeast. Look for northerlies in Lynn Canal, 4-foot seas there, 2 to 4 foot seas elsewhere as you head southward through the inner channels, 10 to 20 knot winds. A southeasterly flow coming up the outer coast, 10 to 25, looking at about 8-foot seas for most areas. And you'll notice winds and seas coming up sharply as we come into Saturday with looking at 16, maybe 17-foot seas as you head out toward Gustavus to Yakutat, 35 to 40 knot winds at their peak, with southeasterlies continuing in the inner channels, gusts to 35 or so around the Stevens Passage region. Sustained winds, though, holding around 20 for most areas on the inside on Saturday. For South Central and Prince William Sound, we're looking at northeasterlies, 20 knots, 4-foot seas, 14 to 16-foot seas there across the northern Gulf as winds come up to 40 to 45 knots outside of the Barrens. A northeasterly flow coming down Cook Inlet, 30 to 35, and those easterlies at 40 crossing over into the western Barrens with a 16-foot sea outside of Kashamak Bay on Friday. Winds improve on Saturday, though, as they all shift over into southeast. We'll get easterlies at 20 knots inside of Prince William Sound, holding at 4-foot seas there. Northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet and picking up a little bit more south of Clam Gulch as you head out toward Homer and the Barrens. 25 knots with a 6 to 7-foot sea and much higher seas out over the open water. Of course, we're talking about 12 to 14-foot seas there for your Saturday. For Southwest, Kodiak Island, 35 knots on either side, 12-foot seas on the inside of Shelikof Strait, 15-foot seas out over the Gulf waters there. Easterlies inside of Bristol Bay with a 5-foot sea. Northerlies down the Alaska Peninsula coastline with a 6-foot sea. The winds coming out of the north there. And north and westerlies down around Sandpoint, 20 knots with a 10-foot sea. That'll shift over to a south and westerly flow for most areas as that low pressure system gradually moves northward there. Look for a 20-knot wind inside of Shelikof Strait at a 6-foot sea, southerlies east of AKwx and Kodiak, and winds only at 10 to 15 knots across the Bering Sea coast, then 2 to 3-foot seas on Saturday. For the Aleutians, a south and easterly flow for the central and eastern chain, generally 20 to 30 knots in most areas, 4 to 8-foot seas for the Bering Sea, and about 10 to 11-foot seas there for the Pacific side. Southwesterlies for areas between Adak and Kiska, 20 knots, but a northeasterly return flow coming on the backside of this, and much higher seas there as well, as that colder north wind is being drug into the mix. 12-foot seas there with a 30-knot wind again as we get into Friday. That all becomes northwesterly though as that wave passes to the east. You can see southwesterlies continuing for Unalaska on either side. More of a north and northwesterly wind following that. 20 to 25 knot winds are expected for Saturday, then anywhere from 5 to about 7-foot seas for the Bering Sea coast, 9 to 14-foot seas for the Pacific, and 13 to 14-foot seas there on the backside of that weather system. For Friday on the west coast, look for a southeasterly offshore wind through Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. That'll be blowing onshore to St. Lawrence Island and up toward Nome. 5 to 7-foot seas there, but blowing away from the Yukon Delta, I should say. Easterlies for St. Paul and St. George. And out of the Kuskokwim Delta, look for a 7-foot sea, 25-knot winds on Friday, becoming southerly at 15 as we get into your Saturday with a 3-foot sea. Northwesterlies coming in behind this weather system, 25 knots in St. Matthew and St. Paul and St. George, 8 to 10-foot seas there. And we keep that offshore flow for the northern areas, 15 to 20 knots, and a 4-foot sea is expected. Over the ice, it's easterlies at 15 knots for most of the Beaufort, and an offshore wind continues for the Chukchi, 25 knots with a 5 to 6-foot sea for Friday. As we get into Saturday, the winds pick up sharply, 25 to 30 knots for the Beaufort, and that offshore wind continues, but seas are coming up there, 5 to 6-foot seas at least, and maybe some areas pushing 8 to 9 feet as you head out a little bit further north and west from land there in the Kotzebue Sound region. Recapping tonight's weather, there are no watches, warnings, or advisories posted for most of the mainland or the areas out to the west. We're looking at some fog, though, potentially around southeast with high pressure still in charge. The next weather maker is moving into the west. That'll bring us some snow for southwestern Alaska and rain for south central and Kodiak Island. As that gradually moves north and east, there's a possibility of some freezing rain or maybe some sleet as that moves into the southwest, but it does look like it'll gradually mix out toward rain as snow moves a little bit further into the interior as we go into your Friday. Periods of heavy rain may be found across the northern Gulf. Initially, southeast stays fairly dry, but it does look like this will bring some periods of heavy rain to the north and eastern Gulf. The snow levels will begin to climb around Haines and Skagway and Juneau quickly as we go through your Saturday, and some mixed precipitation for the interior.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.